Hello everyone, welcome to this episode of the Intelligence Spotlight series. Today we talk about conflict reporting. So there is a kind of journalism that can't be done from behind a desk. It's the kind that begins with a flight into uncertainty, a notepad in one hand and a flak jacket in the other. Conflict zone reporting isn't often romanticized, but in truth it's very messy, dangerous, and ethically fraught and challenging. It means bearing witness to the worst of what humans can do to each other, while also holding into the responsibility to tell it clearly, fairly, and with context. At a time when disinformation travels faster than facts and narratives are crafted before bullets even stop flying, the role of the frontline journalist has never been more critical or more vulnerable. These are the reporters who challenge offshore stories, who risk being used as tools of propaganda, and who often face the question, whose truth are we telling, and at what cost? But despite the dangers, or perhaps because of them, conflict reporters remain essential. They are the ones who go where others won't. They try to show us what we are not meant to see. Their work shapes international response, informs policy, and more importantly, rehumanizes lives that are just reduced to statistics. And today, we're joined by someone who has done exactly that, reported from the margins, navigated the chaos, and helped the world understand it better. Let's welcome Alicia Alamillos.
Thank you very much, guys. And thank you very much also for the very nice introduction. I think you framed it very well, how we are facing, and one of the very low risk we fear only when we start talking about conflict journalism, because it's this romanticized of the lonely reporter going to the field, and indeed it's messy. It is many people also involved indeed, and you have to face quick decisions very without that much coverage of editors or even this full view you are able to do when you are on the desk. When in the field, it's the time decision is very short. You have to make that. So thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
And thank you so much for accepting the invite. Alicia is a journalist, and currently she works as editor-in-chief of the international desk at El Confidencial. It is one of Spain's foremost digital news outlets with over a decade of experience in international reporting. Alicia has covered major global crises, providing in-depth analysis from the front lines. Her career has undertaken across the continent, places like North Africa, like Egypt, covering events in Sub-Saharan, from Nairobi, Kenya, also for the Spanish news agency EFE. Alicia's expertise spans conflict reporting, EU affairs, and geostrategic analysis, always aiming to contextualize current events within broader global trends. Alicia, the first question would be an interesting one, because you've reported from places like Cairo, Nairobi, and now you lead an international desk in Spain. That's a lot of stamps on your passport for sure, and probably more than a few intense moments along the way. If you can remember, what's that one unforgettable moment, maybe surreal, funny, or unexpectedly very human, that stayed with you from your time in the field?
Okay, yes, there have been many, because it's almost already 10 years of reporting, and basically I have done international news because it was really made me passionate about journalism and about telling stories. So there is a lot indeed, and they might seem not very well connected, but yes, the one that really strike me, of course, it is not a funny one. So maybe it's a bit too strong for the beginning, but it's, when I get asked these kind of things, I only have two anecdotes in mind that always come to mind. I was in Nairobi. I was very young. It was my first working in the field. I was working for a news agency. So it's very different how you work when you are from a news agency, that you have to be like the bricks of journalism, that when you are for a normal newspaper, because the approach, it's more broad. But it was in 2015, I guess, yes. And it was, you might remember, a terrible terrorist attack in the border of Nairobi, of Kenya and Somalia. in an university. So then was one of the peak moments of Al-Shabaab militants, and they assaulted an university in Garissa. It was a region nearby Somalia in Kenya. So it was a terrible attack. I wasn't there, of course. It was very difficult to reach the place. So it was an assault on a university, on the dorms. So the militants were killing people. They were young people, students and everything. But they brought all the bodies to Nairobi for the parents to identify them. And I remember I was, of course, shocked. No, it was the beginning of my career. So I was looking at the faces of these kind of very young people and the families. And I was so overwhelmed at the beginning. No, it was in a morgue, and of course there have been many days. So you see the kids with a photo of when they were found by the Kenyan army in the chest, so you can compare and try to find which one was your relative. And it was very, very strong for me, and I had to go outside to cry a bit, to say, okay, this is maybe too much. I am doing what I'm doing here. Do I need to be here to tell these stories of human horror? And I was just crying outside, and suddenly a girl came to trying to confront me, just try to make me feel better. Don't worry, don't cry, whatever. And she was one of the students present of the attack. And I felt a bit like ashamed, no, at that moment. Of course, I am, as a journalist, able to feel and to have feelings, but I think sometimes the journalists try to put ourselves too much into the focus and forget that we are not the protagonists of our stories. No, so that made me think about how try to avoid every kind of time I can the first person in an article, and try really to focus on what is happening without my whole frame, because of course I went there as a European journalist and a Spanish journalist that doesn't have anything related to do with Kenya. We have very low connections, geopolitical connections or history connections to Kenya or even to Sub-Saharan Africa as a general. So that was really strike me, really make me think I want to keep pursuing this career, but I do not have to make it. It's a job. No, I have to make it as better as possible, but without making me the center of the story. And I think it's very interesting to have maybe not such a strong situation, but yes, this reflection when you are young and journalism. So then you approach this kind of coverage with humility, because you sometimes see all these reporters that go to, I don't know, Middle East especially, and they look that they know everything. And that's the worst way to arrive to a place. You don't know that much. You cannot do any assumptions, because then is when you do mistakes.
Right, absolutely. That's some sort of experience or memory that I think it's very unique, and I think in that sense you learn a lot, and at the same time it's an advice or lesson learned for others who wants to do conflict reporting. And I'm sure that's why you've built your career reporting from regions that are shaped by conflict and political instability. And that kind of work isn't just about, telling the stories. It's also changes how you see the world. So what initially drew you to international reporting, and how those early experiences in conflict actually shaped your journalistic outlook overall?
It is interesting how you say that we have to have in mind that it's not only telling stories, and that is very true. Of course, the stories are important because we are humans, we are social. We need to learn the world through that stories, because we need that examples of what happened to people. And this is maybe a bit cynic, and we cannot be cynical when we're journalists, but the stories are sometimes very similar. In a war, every story is tragic, but they are very similar in between them. So what the approach I wanted to do with my journalism, and what made me go through international news, is this idea of I want to tell the people, or to be on where the things are happening, where what is happening is going to shape the rest of the next years and the rest of the world. We are much more interconnected than we like to know, especially in European audience. They tend to think that they are very far from the conflicts, and it's never like that. They are very close to. So we need to be aware of what is happening, but also to understand what is going to happen to us, and to know all this context. So the stories are the way, the path through to that. It sometimes you need a story, like a small thing, like something that seems small. I don't know, a story of a little kid in Ukraine that had to leave the house because it was struck by the Russian missile. But you don't focus only in that little girl, because that little girl is going to tell the story of the whole situation, no? So what happened to this girl is what is happening to maybe a whole generation of Ukrainians, no? So then I focus on how Ukraine is going to need much more than only peace and only military help in the future, because it's this demographic crisis, or it's going to be to need it for the economic development that is going to affect Europe, and so on, no? So this idea of using stories that are necessary to connect with the reader, because the reader needs stories, but also to tell them, you are not just going to left this article when you finish the article with this beautiful or sad story. No. You are going to know a bit more about what is surrounding you and what is important for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And also it's the dangers you face also important, I think, to think about. Like, conflict reporters often killed on the field. This is not just it's physically dangerous, but also sometimes it's ethically complex as well. If you see another person dying in front of you, for instance, that happened. That's I think one of the general ethical question every journalist have: should they report? Should they help? What it's that moment that actually shapes your career more than anything journalists even thought about. So, and that you're often just making a split-second decision that can later may have a serious consequences for yourself or for others. So can you perhaps share a moment where you may have faced such a difficult ethical decision in the field, and how you approached it exactly?
I have been very lucky, so I didn't have to face any decision of, oh my God, should I stop the recording and help my colleague that is bleeding? I never had to face that. In my case, and I have to frame it correctly, I am not a TV journalist, neither a photographic journalist. So I guess that for them it's a bit more difficult, because they became the story. So they should keep recording what is happening, no? So it is important when, for example, there is a terrorist attack. I remember some colleagues when they were covering La Rambla terrorist attack in Barcelona, and they were facing that strong say, okay, do I record or do I start helping the people? I do not face that. Thank God. It's not my job, because I do writing journalism.
Right.
So I do have this more space for me to have that decision, and I never face that. And but of course you have to face a lot of ethical dilemmas sometimes, because when the journalist is there, it's like this theory of the atoms and the God particle. There's nothing, when we look at the matter change because we are there. So it never happens. Just, we are not invisible. We are not neutral. Our presence change things, and we need to know that. So, for example, we're asking for some example. I would go to Ukraine. We have to be in Bakhmut now. We are in December 2020. I guess I cannot remember exactly the data, but it was a few months before the whole city fall in Russian hands.
Right.
And the city was already half conquered by the Russians, and it has became like a very spotlight of journalism, because everybody was looking at Bakhmut. We really don't look at other cities that were also in fighting, but Bakhmut was like the big thing. If Bakhmut falls, what is going to happen? Blah blah blah. So we are there, and we were doing our job, and we met by chance some people from the Ukrainian army, that they were doing a little command post inside one of the houses abandoned by the people, the civilians that I have led. So they are inside these houses, and they go with these drones and check if they find any trenches with Russians in the outskirts of Bakhmut, no? Because this was an artillery unit. So when they found the Russians, they shoot them with artillery, with mortar. So we were there talking with them, looking at how they were doing the job, and suddenly we noticed that there's one Russian soldier in the trench. And of course they started up, see this Russian soldier, blah blah, he's here, whatever, and then we see the Russian soldier like moving. Of course, at that moment the drones weren't that big on the war. The things have changed a lot, but at the moment the guy was unaware that he has been spotted.
Right.
And I was there. And the Ukrainians were like talking to me and talking about how it was the situation. And I was, the only thing that I was thinking at the moment is like, please don't kill this man only because I'm here. You know, I didn't want them to say, okay, she's a foreign journalist. Let's show her how we kill this man, like how we work killing people just because she is going to report outside. No? So in my mind, it was only, I mean, this is war. If you were going to kill this guy, okay, but not because I am here, please. So finally, didn't happen, but it was this moment of, oh my God, should I say something that I don't want just for show, these kind of things. Finally, they explained to me that they needed to be at least 10 soldiers so to shoot because they were at the moment of very lack of ammunition. So they waited for more soldiers and then they shoot indeed. But these kind of dilemmas we have to be very aware of. And it happened from the beginning of conflict reporting. We have seen how sometimes, especially, for example, in Liberia, war, Sierra Leone, when the journalist was there, the militants would say, okay, look, come here, I'm going to shoot this guy. So we have to be as neutral as possible, but knowing that this is not also possible. And also about ethical dilemmas. It's like every time you talk to somebody, you are asking very hard questions. And especially when it's something that everybody is talking about, like, for example, Bucha. You probably remember this city that was conquered by the Russians, and when they left people on the streets killed. Probably the people were expecting like rapes and these kind of things, no? So every journalist went to Bucha, like it was this kind of culturally thing, because everyone wants a story. Everyone wants the worst story of somebody under the Russian occupation. And you have to be also aware of that, because sometimes you cannot be just going looking for the worst story, because you are asking a woman, oh, do the Russians abuse you? And she might say, yes, but they didn't rape me. They only harassed me and whatever. And they say, okay, you are not for me. Come on, you cannot. So this is a lot of ethical, because you have to treat these people with a lot of respect, because they are recalling all this trauma. But also you have to be aware of what the public is wanting to read, no? So sometimes it's even better to skip that. So, for example, I mentioned the case of Bucha because everybody was there. It was all media was there. And for my newspaper, El Confidencial, we had to be very clear what we wanted to do with the coverage. We want to go on competition for the last breaking news. We don't need to go to every press conference just to have to be there and tell with our words. We wanted to do something a bit different. So that's what you do. You don't go to Bucha to try to reach the photo of the cat in the streets destroyed, but just go to a different city around. They are all in the same. So there's a lot of these little ethical decisions that you have to make that is very related to persons, of course, also related to military and so on. But it's every time, every moment. It's very exhausting sometimes. You have to do a lot of intellectual work on what should I do now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it really transitions very well to the next question, because we also hear that war is not just a battle of weapons, but it's also a battle of narratives. And journalists are right in the middle of that battlefield. For instance, the case of Bucha you mentioned, there were a lot of disinformation around that, and there was some Russian influences in journalists claiming that it was a staged propaganda attempt by Ukraine to show to foreign and Western journalists that this thing actually happened. But of course, most journalists sometimes either it's a trap for them or either this actually happened, but to discredit those journalists, others staging or even calling them out as propagandists. So in that case, like a lot of Russian media and journalists were calling others as tools of propaganda. And in that case, how do you handle the pressure of disinformation, propaganda, and attempt to shape your reporting, especially when multiple actors are fighting for control of the story?
Yeah, of course, in the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the propaganda was clear. Russia has been very powerful on that. They already knew, and I guess every country, it's not only Russia, but Russia knew very from the beginning that how important it's to shape narratives. Sometimes not even with lies. The Bucha is a lie, completely lie. This idea of what's a stage. There was an actual killings. I've seen bodies. So there were people killed there, and it was a massacre. And the point is, like, the Russians weren't expecting to leave so fast and so early. So they weren't able to really coverage. And I will recommend in this case, for example, very interesting, the documentary of 20 Days of Mariupol, because it touched a bit this story on how Russia was trying to cover everything and to not allow any journalists to get into the areas controlled by them, of course, because they thought they would control Ukraine in a very fast pace. That finally wasn't possible. But in the areas they get very fast, the coverage was very little and the connection was very little. And that was they wanted, no? They wanted to keep saying in public, we are not killing civilians, but indeed they were killing civilians, no? So 20 Days of Mariupol does a very interesting job on that, because we were still saying, no, we are not bombing maternities and hospitals, and they were having these photos of the maternity hospital in Mariupol and everything. And Bucha was a bit different because, of course, we have many journalists, Western journalists, but also from other countries going there and seeing. So it was a bit more difficult. I think the propaganda on Bucha was more just say, no, this is a stage, like not really useful. No, I think there are other propagandas a bit more subtle that Russia is very powerful that are a bit more useful. No? But yes, of course, because they only want they don't want you to convince you that they have that they are in right, but just to make you doubt enough. So if you have confusion, you say, okay, I don't believe anything. I don't believe in anybody. And that's really the problem with journalism now. It's not that we have to go to each lie we find, and by many governments, it's not only Russia, of course. We don't have to go by every lie to say this is a lie, but they just create the atmosphere that everything could be a lie, no? So in this chaos, they fish some people that just to be opposed to reading or opposed to, they don't believe in anything. And also, of course, because there are journalists that fall on that trap, no? So I have a very different example that I would like to share. If, for example, in Israel, war in Gaza, I'm not sure if you remember still the case of the 40 beheaded babies.
Oh, yes.
That the Israeli government was claiming, well, not the government, okay, no. This was Israeli military quoted by another one, but quoted by another one. So there was suddenly a narrative on there were 40 babies beheaded in the kibbutz. I have been to the kibbutz, and of course the images have been horrible. So I don't want to say that it wasn't an attack. It was a terrorist attack against people that were doing their lives in the kibbutz. But for example, in this case, the problem is not the person that is on the field, but it's the people that are on the desk, because they receive this and they start seeing it in everywhere. The information atmosphere now is so connected that we see it in the New York Times, we see it in many places, and they say, okay, we don't have a reporter in that specific kibbutz, so let's just report it as it is said, no? Because it was I think reported by Israeli TV station or something like that. So sometimes it's more difficult. I mean, it's not even being there that you are subject to these narratives and propaganda battles and everything, but also from outside, no? So we, as journalists, we have to be very aware, because it's happening everywhere, and we shouldn't trust like so easily anything. And especially in the case of the babies, I had to, for example, in my case, in a confidential, I have to say, no, this is not going to be published till we know a bit more, because you cannot trace who is saying what, no? I mean, finally, who said what was this volunteers, medical volunteers that they go there to pick the Jewish bodies and everything. And of course, there wasn't any track on what happened, no? And so this for the disinformation. But also, I wanted to say, and just cut me if I speak too much.
No, please. It's interesting to hear.
When you are in the field, you know much more less also, because you know what you are seeing. So your eyes are the only thing you have, and of course you have your media, your contacts, many things. But sometimes you need somebody from behind to tell you the big picture, because sometimes it's very narrow what you see, because you see better, but smaller, no, narrow. And in the Ukrainian coverage, for example, it is also interesting to know that is a very military coverage, as you said. It's something very controlled by the army. Now, especially that the front line has stabilized a bit, you have to go with the army. So then you have to be very aware of that. I've been talking with some other colleagues and they say, okay, the Ukrainian army are not giving us the whole information. And yeah, it's not their work. I mean, their work is to win the war. And you have to be aware of that. Their work is not to make us easier going to the places. We have to go because it's our job. But we don't need to trust the army or to make them, okay, you should make my work easier.
Yeah.
No. That's something important also because you have to put on quarantine everything they say. In the case of the Ukrainian army, I have been pleasantly surprised. Of course, it is an army, so it's not going to share all the information. But because of this, what I was telling before about how Russia wanted to make like a information silence on what is happening, they were very eager to share things, especially when Ukrainian army was doing well in 2022-3.
Yeah.
They shared a lot, and later it was a bit more difficult, but they still give you some access and you can talk to people, and they do not really check that much on what everybody's talking to you. No?
Right.
So maybe also because they will be too much work. They read everything we publish, but they don't go then to your source and say, okay, why you talk to this journalist? They are not on that level. So I was pleasantly surprised, but every war is like that. I mean, when you work with the US Army, it's the same. When you work with the Spanish Army, it's the same. So sometimes you have to go other ways. You cannot make your coverage only on the army, but also, and this makes very interesting on the topic of your podcast, OSINT now is an amazing tool, and we are using it a lot because we cannot trust the army, but we can trust this kind of open source information. It is sometimes difficult for the journalists on the field because we cannot be expert on everything, but that's why the coverage of conflict now is so complete. We have the guy who's in the field, who has the stories, who have the context, who have the sources. Then we have the people on the desk that who have the big view, who have the breaking news, who has, of course, the subscriptions to any news agency. And then we have the OSINT expert or the OSINT source that will help to make us better coverage. So now I feel it's comparing to other conflicts. Now it's much more information, but also much more easier to try to read for the people. So it is a democratization sometimes of what we see.
Exactly.
Maybe too much information sometimes because people get tired, but it is positive.
Yeah, definitely. That's why when we have a lot of information there, you need a lot of people filtering them too, because among them, not all information is accurate. So I think that's the job of OSINT experts and journalists to filter them out. And I guess 50 to 80% of the information spreads faster on social media and narratives, propaganda, influence operations happening there. So I think a lot of journalists are incorporating different methods into their work so that they can fast track the information that they are verifying, but also use different sources to corroborate the information they receive, which is very, very important as well. But now, after a decade of reporting and conflict covering different countries, now, so as the editor-in-chief of the international desk, you're shaping, of course, not just the stories, but also how the audience can understand global events. So that's very important in a way. So how much your field experience influence your editorial decisions today? How much of that actually apply in your day-to-day? And do you ever feel torn between what you should be reported and what will actually be heard? Do you predict the outcome of what you report and allow a report to be published?
Yeah, sure. I'm going to start from where I was very young. This again, we're back to Nairobi, and I was based there, so I was living there. I really didn't like at the moment, and still don't like that much, this idea of a war reporter that goes to every war. I understand why they exist as a concept, especially in the media who has enough resources, because when you cover a war, you need to have like a skill set. You need to know how to deal with an army. Even each army is different. You need to know how to deal with stress. You need to know how to deal with danger, with security. You need to know when to go and everything. But saying so, when I was in Nairobi, I was based there. And then you see all these people that came just once for the specific event that happened and say something like, there's nobody working here, there's nobody covering this thing, especially in Spain, because in the Spanish media, Africa was very under coverage. So I felt at the moment that the coverage of the wars had been poisoned by that, because then it became only a war. But when you work there, when you are the correspondent on a place, when you know Nairobi from working as a normal journalist, like trying to do a normal coverage of political events, cultural events, social events. I don't know. I remember the most weird stuff I was writing was about cinema in the Serengeti. I don't know. There's many options. Then the coverage of a war becomes what I feel it's more truly for the reader. After Nairobi, I went to Cairo to cover a bit Middle East, and I wasn't the person in charge of this coverage, but I helped when it was holidays or something like that. What happened in the coverage of Syria civil war? The people lost everything, all interest, when the war was only on how many square kilometers have been conquered or not, in which city are, even not city, because at the moment it's not cities, it's villages. It's like just little houses around a road that the Assad forces conquering or not. So that is a problem, because of course the attention, the cycle of attention, we would like to be better, but it's the one it is. The people try to think different stuff. They lose attention. So this mix of my experience on Syria, what happened in Syria, and what happened in Africa, that it was very difficult to make the people to read about Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, countries, because Spain has a lot of interest in the Northern Africa region. It's only the sub-Saharan. That thing really now shapes my approach to editing the editor in Madrid, in the desk, because I do not want to fall in the same mistakes. So I might maybe sometimes pass on something that is new because it's very little. So sometimes I say, okay, we need a critical amount of things happening around this thing to then do a good job, a good article, a bit more full of things. So we do not try to tell the reader everything that they can really indeed now read it on Twitter or Blue Sky or whatever the social network of your choice, but to be this curator, as you were saying, I couldn't remember which word you used, but this idea of curator, like to select what is the actual thing that is important, and to purchase in through stories or through analysis or through whatever, no? It's something that we call the other angle, the second read, no? So this idea of, yes, you are not going to be informed by me on the last thing because maybe it's too much, but you are going to have like something more thought on what is happening, no? So that is what I think that really approaches me being being in the field to what I try to do on the desk. Also, of course, it really helps me with trying to understand the terrible conditions that sometimes the journalists, because it's in Spain, the freelance journalism, it is an epidemic. So you have to have that in mind and everything. But I would say this idea of not really trying to be in this race that you are going to be sometimes exhausted. Of course, you have to bring your own news. That is mandatory. But sometimes it's not needed to be fighting for every little piece of information, but really to think about what this means, no? So that's why that's the approach we try. Yeah, and another thing that I really learned from the field is war cannot be only about military, but also it's about everything, no? So especially, for example, in Ukraine, that is so close to Europe, it is economy, it is social, it is, I don't know, in the case of Spain, for example, we have a very different gauge of the trains. So the weight of the trains is different from Spain to France. So we are sharing our knowledge to Ukrainians. No, it's stupid. It's logistics. Logistics is important. Connections. The demographic crisis I was talking about before, it's going to affect Europe. No, so if you only focus the war on the military wins or losses, then you are doing wrong. We are talking about energy. You have heard about the Spanish blackout like 2 weeks ago, last week. There was a huge blackout. One of the most read articles for me, it was about how Ukraine has learned to deal with these blackouts. So it is very interesting to try to approach with a very broader mind, because the people are interested to read. They wanted to read. It's only they don't want to be reading every time the same.
Yeah, very interesting to hear that. And I'm sure when listeners listen to them, and especially the aspiring young journalists, might be asking the question, okay, these sound so good, we can learn a lot, and it is full of experiences. But at the end of the day, how should we continue our career when there is a lot of fun things that are cut in most places? Most journalists face danger. And according to the latest report by the international, I think from the ICJ, International Committee of Journalism, or there was a survey showing that over the last decade, the scene of journalism has been deteriorating. More journalists facing dangers throughout the world, not just in one place. So overall, things are changing. So what's your one advice for people who are starting new in this career? How to navigate the challenges of today's world?
Yeah, okay. So I guess the scenario is very different on US media and, for example, Spanish or European media. It is true that there is this idea of there's a lot of cutting of funding because many, especially small media or local media, have been living on that funding, maybe governmental, maybe just organizations. And it was interesting because it really allowed to do something different from the legacy media that were so big and so having all the information. But saying that you cannot really compare what is happening in Spain and US or British media or German media and so on, I really think that we are seeing a change, a very different, but it's going to be painful because especially with the artificial intelligence, we are going to start seeing the decline on depending on Google search and this kind of things because it's not going to be needed anymore. Then the media will have to face this election to, do I go to try to write about everything, even though knowing that it maybe never reach somebody, but when it reach, it's going to be a lot of readers, or try to separate and give this all news, all the type of news, all the breaking news, do it for, I don't know, to Reuters, to the agencies, to everything, and then focus on your own stories, your own intelligence, your own scoops, everything. Because if you try to do both, it is not possible. You lose a lot of time if you just have to go to every press conference. You have to write about, I don't know, every little story that is happening everywhere. You lose your time and then you don't cultivate your sources. And if you don't cultivate your sources, your reporting is worse and everything. So it's going to be a very different path for the H media. And it's going to be difficult, I say, because the owners of media might see it's easier for the revenues and everything to choose the first path first. So it's going to be painful, but then when some media are going to die in the way, but I guess that there is the only option to survive is to go the other side, not to say, okay, we are not going to die in this race. It's a stupid race. We cannot do everything. We're just going to focus. So that's, for example, when we see, I don't know, little newsletters, very specific ones, or maybe when you read the articles, you read really when you want to enjoy your time and to see what really is happening. It only came from one or two media, but the breaking became from everywhere. I don't know, BBC Mundo, whatever. No, so this differentiation for the younger journalists, I will try to tell them, choose your path first because you cannot do both. Be very aware of which one you chose because each of them come with their own problems, and also do a lot. I know it's not the best thing to say, but if you don't put yourself in the places where things happening, I don't mean war, I mean everything is happening in the world. If you don't go to meetings, if you don't go to encounters with other journalists or with I don't know, a talk, a summit on whatever, so you go, the people know you, they see you, you start talking, because if you don't go to places, never is going to happen to you. You have to be outside. And that's what I would say my little advice on the younger generation.
Yeah, very, very, very interesting. And I'm sure everyone enjoyed listening to you and your insights, especially someone who's working from the Spanish angle towards journalism. Thank you so much, Alicia, for your time. Muchas gracias.
De nada.